Hello, my name is Rivrekor. I am a CCP student, and today I'll be discussing the impact of reliance on fossil fuels on native populations in North America. So, my guiding question has been, how has societal reliance on fossil fuels impacted American native groups, specifically in the United States? So first we're going to look at how and where these fossil fuels form. So coal forms when plant matter, primarily from the Carboniferous period, undergoes intense heat and pressure underground. And this leads to a process called coalification, where all of this is compressed and creates the coal that we use for energy combustion. So there are five subtypes of coal that you can see down here. We have peat, lignite, subbituminous, bituminous, and anthracite coal. There are, in power plants, the three main types which are used are the lignite, subbituminous, and bituminous. So in North America, we have massive coal reserves. In the United States specifically, we have 28% of the coal reserves in the entire world, and we are the third largest coal producer in the world. Even today, with it being well documented, a lot of the environmental impacts of coal and the health impacts, it is still responsible for more than 11% of our energy consumption. So, as far as the formation of oil and natural gas, they do undergo similar formation processes to coal. This old carbon-based matter from plants and animals undergoes even more intense heat and pressure, turning it into oil and natural gas. So you can see in this diagram on the right, you have the dead decaying organic matter that gets compressed by these layers of sedimentary rock, which create a sort of chamber with this oil and natural gas inside it, and they do oftentimes coexist in the same area. So as far as North America specifically, as you can see by the map on the right, we have a lot of oil and natural gas that is naturally occurring underneath the United States. And it accounts for about 72% of our total energy consumption. So a huge part of our economy, a huge part of our energy, um, and how we live our everyday lives. So if we look at the impact of fossil fuels on native groups, there's a lot of resource overlap on native reservations. So if we look at this map on the right, all of these darker red and orange areas most likely are reservations with the highest native populations. So most of the darker areas are reservations or they used to be reservations. A trigger warning for this section, all of the stories about the native people and everything that's happened to them, I will give a trigger warning for ethnic cleansing and racism. There's a lot of really terrible history that goes along with this topic. So just a warning on that. So following the Indian Removal Act in 1830, put in place by President Andrew Jackson, there was the Trail of Tears, and native tribes were essentially forced out of their historic indigenous lands in the east, and forced to go west onto what was perceived as undesirable land. However, later in history, as our energy processes start to change, we learn more about the West. A lot of people realized that this land had really valuable fossil fuel resources underneath it, which unsurprisingly led to conflicts between the native groups who had been moved there and the United States government and the energy companies that wanted to take possession of these natural resources. So if we look specifically at coal and its overlap, if we overlay a map of the coal that we looked at in the United States, you can see that it overlaps significantly with these reservations. So if we're looking down here at the Four Corners area between Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona, we have the San Juan River region, the Oneida region, and all of these areas in here, which have bituminous and subbituminous coal. And then if we move up into Montana and Wyoming, a really big portion of coal there, and then also a bit in North and South Dakota as well. Going back to the map, these are a lot of areas that do overlap with Indian and Native settlements and reservations. So if we look at then oil and gas is a pretty similar story. So if we overlay a map, we can see in this Four Corners region, a really big amount of natural gas and oil right there. Again, going all the way up into Montana and this North and South Dakota region, where again, we do see a significant amount of native settlement. So this brings us to the story of the Navajo, the Hopi, and the big business interests. So the Navajo and Hopi tribes both historically occupy the land in the Four Corners. You can see this in the diagram on the right, with the green portion being the Navajo Nation and then the Hopi Nation and tribe being in that inner yellow area. So in the mid 1950s, the state of Arizona was looking for natural resources, and they realized that there were coal and oil reserves on the Navajo and Hopi reservation lands, and they saw these resources as a solution to their growing energy needs. So what happened was a coalition of 21 energy companies joined forces as West or Western Energy Supply and Transmission Associates to try and gain access to the resources in this region. These companies attempted to lease the Navajo land for oil resource development for the first time in 1922, but they were met with dissent from Native leaders who didn't want to, quote unquote, defile Mother Earth with these mining and fracking processes. So this leads to the creation of what is known as the Joint Use Area. In 1935, Congress passed the Indian Reorganization Act, which essentially forced these tribes to create tribal councils. And in the case of the Hopi and the Navajo, this was almost exclusively for the purpose of having someone for these oil companies to negotiate with for these lands. In 1938, they passed the Mineral Development Act, which said that land within an Indian reservation or native reservation could be leased for mining purposes, but only by the authority of the tribal council or some other authorized spokesperson. So this leads to a couple decades of conflict and trials and failures with negotiation between the groups. And in 1962, a district court in a case known as Healing versus Jones decided that the Hopi and Navajo tribes had joint interests in the land and created this joint use area, saying that both of the tribes had to agree on any sort of resource mining or activity that would occur on that land. And you can see that over here on the right in this rectangle area with the Hopi reservation inside of it. So unfortunately for these energy companies, the joint ownership of this land made it almost impossible for them to start um, operations inside of the joint use area. The press quickly began to cover this story as a land dispute between the Navajo and the Hopi and these energy companies. And all of this increased media attention prompted the Hopi Council to actually hire a public relation firm called Evans and Associates to manage the situation. But unbeknownst to the Hopi people, this firm was actually the exact same firm that was representing West. So these energy companies looking to exploit the land for their natural resources. So what this public relations firm ended up doing was they brought in TV crews and press to try and create a distorted image of the Navajo people being extremely violent um, and basically terrible neighbors to the Hopi people, killing livestock, being violent towards the people themselves. All of these things which weren't true to try and create tension between the groups with this essentially what was propaganda. Um, so obviously, this whole entire situation had a massive impact on these historically native lands. So the federal government took this media narrative and ran with it, and essentially used what was happening in the media as grounds to create a building moratorium and a development moratorium for the Navajo people. So what this did was it made it illegal for the Navajo to build or repair homes and their farms, and that it included a livestock reduction clause, which made it so that the Navajo people could no longer rely on livestock and farm raising as their major economies. and way of life, which is what they had been doing for decades. So this was a massive blow to the Navajo people. And as Lee Brooke Phillips put it, the reality is that people are really faced with a surrender or starve situation. So the Navajo people see and view these programs as clear attempts to coerce them from their ancestral homelands. According to author Deborah LaCarenza, the idea that this relocation was caused by a land dispute between the Navajo and Hopi people is a distortion of reality, a diversion created by business interests in order to gain access to the land and its energy sources. And the author is right. So what ended up happening was the Navajo people were, in the end, forced out of their land, and West succeeded in what it was attempting to do. And today, the Four Corners power plant still exists, and it spews over 11 million tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year, sitting on top of these historically Navajo Nation lands. So this did not stop when that situation happened. There have been many instances of it. Following the outbreak of the war in Ukraine and the impact of conflict on energy resources, because Russia is a major oil producer, there were a lot of people domestically who called for American energy independence and increased oil production, more pipelines, more fracking, all things like that. So this is obviously going to have a major impact on Native communities. But as well, before this, oil pipelines have infringed on native lands. So if you look over to the right, this Line 3 pipeline, which is demarcated by the orange line. So this orange line is the original path of Line 3, which existed. And then what ended up happening was when line 3 went out of service, a couple of years later, they decided that they were going to rebuild Line 3, keeping it going directly through these historic Ojibwe lands in Minnesota. Um, Thankfully, there were people who took notice of this, both within the indigenous community and outside of it. They protested and they were successfully able to divert the pipeline into this green path, avoiding these sacred native lands. So why do these native groups care about energy exploitation on their land? Why is this such a big issue for justice in general? So these facilities, coal, oil, and natural gas facilities emit volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and nitrogen oxides, which can combine to form ozone smog, which poses a major threat to children with asthma and seniors with emphysema. So this air that is coming from these plants can also include pollutants like benzene and formaldehyde. Toxic air pollution emissions can also directly affect the health of the individuals living, working, or going to school near facilities, irregardless of their age or health. So natives on reservations are between twice as much and 42 times as much, 42 times as likely to live within the toxic radius of an oil or gas facility compared to others in the same state. So for some final thoughts and conclusions, reliance on fossil fuels has a obvious and disproportionate impact on Native groups in the United States. It has led to displacement, health problems, cultural bigotry, and undue fatalities. Social justice for Native groups is thus deeply intertwined with climate justice today. And I just want to end on this quote from Chief Seattle of the Duwamish Nation from 1854. Says, "Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together, all things connect." I especially like this bolded quote in the middle, "Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves." Um, and I think this is really relevant today with the continued extraction of fossil fuels, with the continued degradation of the environment in a lot of cases, and the impact that that is having not only on specifically and especially the Native community, but also the global community. And that is all I have. Here are my references. If you want to know more about the story of the Navajo and the Hopi, you can click on this link in bold right here. Very sad, but interesting and important story to know. So. Thank you.